and produced by the Sound of Knowledge Incorporated.
Data privacy. We're going to get into a lot more detail now on actually how we do some of the things we talked about. Those of you that are coming back for the second round of this, congratulations.
You're brave.
You're brave.
You're brave. We're proud of you. And there'll be free drinks at 5:30 to reward you for your...
That's right. I'm Eddie Schwartz. I'm Chief Security Officer at Nationwide.
I'm Diana Kelly, and I work for a company called Lockstar. I have 10 years of consulting and design experience for secure systems, and I've worked in the privacy realm with companies large and small.
I have a lot of experience, but I'm not going to admit it in public. All right, so part two of the agenda. Let's just recap. Part one, we talked about why do we care about this, and really why we care about it is the business drivers for this. You know, all this stuff is interesting and it's useful, fun stuff on data privacy, but the fact is we as security people need to justify our existence, need to justify our budgets, need to have ways to enhance the security of our operations and what we do. In the first half, we talked about some of the drivers that are taking us there, and what's the privacy landscape. And then we talked a little bit about some of the impact on our companies if we don't do something about this. Okay, so now we're fully informed on those issues. Now we're going to talk about the real responses to this situation, what we should actually be doing, and some of the solutions that both Diana and I have been involved with in our experience in data privacy.
And I think you should do your disclaimer. I'm worried about you with Nationwide.
I
want you, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I talk about a lot of stuff in here that, Nationwide's doing this or that. The fact is that I have to say that even though I'm saying this thing, these are the views of me as the presenter, and in no way represent the interests of my company or anything that the company's really doing.
Right.
So, whatever that means.
And also, just in case anybody was not at the first session and is going, hey, part two? What's that? That's not in the agenda. Briefly, Eddie and I just met last week. We met because Eddie was going over the website and saw that, oh my gosh, we were back-to-back giving almost exactly the same talk. So we felt that rather than having people have two light one-hour talks covering the same material, that we would join forces and we would...
Take more time.
Yeah, and take two, and well, it's the same amount of time, but we would go more in depth and cover the background in session one and the technology in session two, which is what we're doing.
We talked in the first part of this about the fact that everybody's concerned about data privacy. We added some quotes in the, you'll see them in your book. I kind of like this one from Christy Brinkley. And the issue is that it's a changing world and it's getting worse in terms of data privacy. Certainly the invasions to privacy are getting worse. So basically we're going to talk about what do we do about that. We also said this in the first part, basically planning for privacy. Yes, you do need a plan. And the question is who's planning the plan. We'll talk about that in a second. One of the things you should know is that there's no simple magic pill for this. I mean, there's no way you're just going to go out and buy Checkpoint's privacy. Well, after the last session in there, I heard you don't want to buy Checkpoint, but...
You definitely don't. Yeah, private wall.
Wouldn't want to anyway, but no Checkpoint people in the room, are there? But no, anyway. There's no magic privacy solution out there. There are no technologies out there today that's going to make all this go away. It's in fact... The thing that's going to help this a lot is all of the things that we already know how to do as security practitioners, and now we get to apply to this problem and perhaps get a little more management attention in the application of our knowledge and skills and techniques to this problem. Diana and I are both going to talk about a framework. We come at it a little bit differently, but basically it's the same concept. We've kind of blended it together, but we'll both talk about our experiences in this and how you actually move from saying, oh yes, this is a problem, to actually getting something done and getting something in place that you can feel you've actually got a compliance program working in some way. Okay, where do you start on all this stuff? Well, the privacy policy is where you start. Someone in the break asked me, I want to get all the security done on this privacy thing. where do I go with it? Well, that's a good question. The issue is, however, what is your privacy policy in the company? What do you want to do with data? Do you want to let customers opt in, opt out? And this is not going to be your decision as a security practitioner. This is a decision that's going to be a business decision. It needs to be driven by those people. But basically, this is Eddie's opinion on this.
Yeah, we found
we disagree a little on this, but I think opt-out is a short-sighted position, and I'll tell you why. Opt-out basically means that you tell the customers, we share your data, and if you don't like it, send us a note or call us or do something to get our attention, and we'll let you opt out of that, and we won't share your data anymore. Opt-in is where basically we say, we have lots of business partners with whom we would like to share your data, but because we're nice people, we won't do so unless you tell me proactively, I want you to share my data with somebody. And in some cases, if you think about it, you've already opted in to things voluntarily. Do you want to be on our special mailing list to know about cheap fares to Honolulu? Oh, yes, I do. That's opting in, okay? Do not share is a position that basically says, I don't share data with anybody under any circumstances beyond, actual business requirements that, I need to conduct business, okay? When we looked at this, we're trying to decide what is the right position for the company, and the difficulty is that we were afraid that in time, the U.S. would move to an opt-in environment. That is to say that if we made all the changes that I'm going to talk about later in our systems and our data architectures and so on, we do all that, spend all that money, notify the customers all these things we're doing to meet regulatory requirements, and then the laws would change and say, oh no, now the world is opt-in. So we tended to set the bar high because we were basically trying to manage the potential risk associated with having to redo everything a couple of years from now. Now, Diana, you actually don't believe necessarily that that's going to be the case.
Well, I think it's indicative. We were talking earlier before when we were trying to meld our slides. You were saying that a lot of CSOs and CIOs at other large institutions do not have a security background, which makes you unique because you do have a security background. And I think that your policy is an example of that. You're raising the bar as high as you can and looking at it from really what's better for the consumer, what's more caring. Whereas I do see, there's a strong trend in America, which is really the info gravy train, and opt-out is very much in line with that, because United States has this nice floor already where, hey, unless you say I can't sell your data, I can sell your data. And I think that they're going to continue to sell our data. It's much better from a information gravy train perspective, but it's not it's not as caring of the consumer.
Well, we went through this process. So first step in this framework we're talking about here, you got to have the privacy policy. How did that happen, and why would a security officer be involved in this? The bottom line is we couldn't get anyone to focus on this space. I knew as a security officer that at some point I would have to deal with all this stuff, and I would have to have controls and policy surrounding this, and have changes to potentially the way we classify data, all this kind of stuff. I just basically decided to get people motivated in this space and became, a key player on the team that put this together. But you know what? It's not up to me, which we choose here. The business people get in the room and they all say, how many of you are sharing data? Only one person raised their hand. What's the revenue stream associated with that? Minuscule. Do not share became our policy, basically, and that was a no-brainer. But a lot of companies are not going to have that same situation.
Yeah, they're making huge amounts on it. And the privacy policy, the development is an interesting, how many people here have been involved with security policy development? Okay, that's a good number. Was it a good experience or a bad experience? Yeah.
Did everyone just adopt the policy and say, oh yes, I'm on board with that, and I'll give millions of dollars to support that?
Right. Privacy policy is, again, it's another uphill battle. It's an opportunity, yes, for the company to come together and agree and get buy-in. It's an opportunity to come together and agree and get buy-in. It's also a reality of a very political, supercharged environment.
Well, what you need to obviously take into consideration, which is really important, is if you have a really sort of consumer-unfriendly privacy policy, it could come back to haunt you from a brand perspective. So Again, this is not your decision, but this is part of what goes into it.
Also be aware of what you say in that policy if it's going up on, well, either internally or on your website, because sometimes for entertainment value, you might want, for entertainment in the last one, we said go read the public comments on the NPRM of HIPAA, but for more entertainment value, read everybody's privacy policy, because some people's privacy policies are lawsuits waiting to happen. They pretty much promise the moon, and you want to be very careful that you don't overpromise and leave yourself open to legislation.
Yeah, if you think about it from this standpoint, you go to a large multinational company's privacy policy, and it describes all of these things they do, including the security around the data. Now think of your own jobs and the challenges you've faced in implementing a really comprehensive, complete, bulletproof security program in your organization. You got to start laughing to yourselves, thinking there's no way these people can be doing what they're saying. And in fact, a lot of companies that have gone back and tried to analyze their actual practices against their policies have realized, we're not doing this. So is it okay to say this? Absolutely not. And the FTC would agree with that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of the policy, here's what you're going to wind up with based on the experience that we both have. If you're working in a place that has one single product to sell and one set of customers in a single vertical, and that's about it, you might be able to achieve an enterprise privacy policy, okay? And that is that you do everything a certain way. But a lot of companies have multiple products that are completely different due to acquisitions or mergers that have occurred. They work in different verticals potentially. They cross, they do things that are across verticals, and the data needs to move across those, so they might be subject to multiple regulatory environments. So what you might wind up with is some high-level overarching statement of these are the things we're going to do, and then, and when I say overarching, translate that to vague statement of this is what we're going to do, and then sub-policies associated with each specific product line or line of business that actually describes more granularly exactly what are the policies and what are the controls, the security controls surrounding that policy. It's not a bad thing to have multiple policies. I mean, it's not like you're giving up something in the process, but the issue is if you do have multiple policies, it raises the complexity in your organization in terms of managing the security around that. And obviously, the key thing is, I don't know about all of you, but I didn't want to stay in the privacy business the rest of my life. I wanted to get on with this job I was hired to do, which is information security. So the corporation needs to have somebody accountable and responsible for managing that policy environment, and that would be a privacy officer.
It's also more effective, too. I mean, if you try and put everything into one single policy, you usually end up with doorstops. And that's not going to be very, very useful. Very thick, very big wads of paper that nobody can plow through. A high-level policy, when Eddie says vague, it doesn't mean bad. It really just means this is what basically the organization believes. It's our philosophy. And then the functional sub-policies are short and readable. And another big benefit is that if something new comes out, you can adjust to that really quickly within these shorter sub-policies rather than having to go back to the doorstop and finding out, cross-section, subsection A of page 576, blah, blah. Those things almost never get rewritten. And really, when the internet started to flood, I saw a lot of this in companies because their policies just couldn't begin to understand or adhere to what was going on. So they weren't doing anything in terms of saying what's acceptable usage of the web, what's acceptable usage of mail.
Some other things on policies. There are a lot of good examples out there already, okay? Now, you do need to learn the difference between good and bad, but again, some of the things are driven by regulatory requirements, and some of them are driven by, like, the truth, basically. Can we do this thing that we agreed to do? I just got beaten up by my boss recently because I issued a new security policy in the office, and he said, how the heck are we ever going to achieve this in the time frame you've described? So he was giving me a reality check. The same thing on the privacy policies. A lot of good stuff out there, and there are a lot of organizations that have already researched who has good privacy policies, and you can join these organizations and get that information. One that comes to mind is Privacy in American Business. It's an organization that's led by Alan Weston, who's one of the principal thinkers in privacy public policy. I think he's a law professor at Columbia, or maybe he's left that and figured out he could make some money on this space. But Anyway.
Also, the final rule of GLBA has sample policy clauses in it that you're encouraged to lift and reuse.
Right. One of the things that is really important is that you put these policies through, and we'll talk about that in a second, a very comprehensive review process. The lawyers have to look at it really closely. Don't forget that step. I mean, if you don't have general counsel signing on the bottom line saying this policy is okay, you got a problem. And certainly there are other things like a compliance officer would need to review them if you're in a bank, for example. You have to go through that whole process. So who clears on the policy? The short answer is everyone. When I say everyone, here's what I mean by that. You'd be amazed at the things you don't know that goes on. When we got people to the table and started talking about whether we share data or not today, everyone was like, oh, no, we don't share data. We don't share data. And as we started digging, we actually sent a SWAT team out with a mission of trying to find out. You come to find out that there are little pockets of places where we do share data, and we didn't know about it. And the product owners over that area had no idea we were doing this, and also were upset that they weren't getting any revenue for it or something like that. But I mean, the point is that you gotta push this way down into the organization and make sure that everyone understands what we're agreeing to do. Imagine from the systems perspective, the assumptions that you make about changes you'll need to make to the systems, come to find out that there's some environment that's 20 years old and they just, there's something that'll completely break if you add another data attribute to a database or something like that. So these are the people that need to be involved. The CEO obviously has to decide from a brand perspective where you want to be. I talked already about business units, the lawyers. If you have a public policy area in your company, like a government affairs or a regulatory affairs officer, he or she needs to be involved in this process. Of course, information security has a key role in this, which we'll describe a little more. And you need to have some serious IT reps at the table. All of these people should clear on this policy.
Yeah, and having them all at the table does mean you're going to have more fights at the table, a lot more fights at the table, but it means that when the policy is lifted up and goes away, you're going to have a lot more buy-in and drill down within the organization. If you don't get the buy-in at that table and you don't go through the pain of the fighting as you're establishing the policy, it's not going to be implemented. People will they will find ways around it unless they feel that they are co-owners of it.
Okay, so step one, you've got this policy. Now you as a security officer or security manager understand that, okay, these are the rules by which we're going to live as a company. Well, now you get to translate that to real life. And real life is that there are certain operational considerations that map against this privacy policy. For the sake of simplification, divided this into 4 areas: process, organization, technology, and compliance. And I'll talk about each of these in detail in a second. But basically, if you imagine that within each of those areas, there are things to do in order to meet the policy objectives. If you're, again, a big company with a lot of products and a lot of lines of business, you're going to have to be involved in a process that maps this across any potential business units or product lines that have to work into these operational components that'll have to be fixed. I'll talk about them next. So, okay, what do we do? Well, in order to do this, you got to get a working group together of some kind. And basically the participants of the group are the people that cleared on the policy to a large extent. You're going to have a lot of spin-offs, potentially. The IT people are going to have a lot of work to do. Security people are going to have a lot of work to do. The lawyers are going to have different issues that they're going to investigate on their own. But basically, you start with a process where you actually figure out, what are we doing today? All right? And what are we doing today won't necessarily jibe with what your privacy policy says. Your privacy policy says we do not share information. Oops, we're sharing it today. Or your privacy policy says we're going to give everyone the opportunity to opt out of the sharing of information. Oops, we have in 3 lines of business none of that today. Okay? So all of that needs to be figured out in some way, and all of the issues need to be ferreted out. The process that I use is based on those 4 elements that I described to you earlier. For example, in the process area, basically some questions you should ask yourself. What processes do we follow in the life cycle of personally identifiable information? In other words, when a data record is captured, Presumably it might be captured by telephone, by an internet form of some sort, or some kind of customer service interaction. What is the life cycle of that piece of information, and do I truly understand from the beginning to the end of a customer record in what databases it lives, who touches it at a given point in time, who should be allowed to see it, who should be allowed to aggregate it with something else? All of these things need to be considered. There are basically issues like scripts. For example, you have customer service reps that they have scripts, and when someone calls and says, hey, I want to do something on my policy, they should have forms that say, oh, it's a policy question about my auto insurance, ask them these 3 questions. They ask these 3 questions, another result comes out. You need scripts that comply with your privacy policy. If you said certain things, you don't want your customer service reps to be saying, oh yeah, you have a privacy question? Oh yeah, well we share the data when your privacy policy says you don't. So all of these process-related things you need to address. Organizational perspective, that's an easy one. Who's in charge of privacy in your organization? I was a year ago. I mean, I was somewhat self-anointed, but up until last month, I was basically in charge of privacy. The presidents of the company heard that, and they said, oh, Eddie's in charge of privacy. Well, no, I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know anything about public policy except what I'm concerned about and what interests me sometimes, So these are questions you need to ask yourself. What are all the different organizational touch points associated with this? For example, who responds to privacy inquiries from regulators or from the FTC? Who responds to privacy inquiries from customers and things like that? All of these different organizational components need to be established. What's the accountability model? We got a compliance office. Guess what? They don't know anything about privacy, and they haven't signed up to do anything with it, and they don't think that they're going to have to do anything with it. All these things need to be evaluated. From a technology perspective, this comes a lot closer to some of the stuff that we're dealing with. It is things like, do we classify data in any way? I don't know how many of you have ever tried to do anything with classifying data in a database, but do you guys have any data models that actually set labels and attributes on pieces of data so that you knew that if you combined fields 2, 3, and 5, that would constitute personally identifiable information? Unless you work for DoD, you probably haven't done that to the degree where you've actually established field-level attributes on data. But yet, you've got to in some way be able to manage that data set, and that potentially implies a change to your data architecture. That needs to be analyzed. Going a little further than that, think of data and transmission. I was talking to somebody in the break about, we just send data from point A to point B. I mean, it's a concern because I know in our organization we've got rogue installations of PGP sending customer data out. We've got people FTPing data in the clear that contains personally identifiable information. How are you going to get a grip on that? Do you have a grip on it today? This is the delta you need to manage in terms of where you say you're going to be in your privacy policy and ultimately where you are today. And finally, in the compliance, what actually is the compliance strategy of the company? Hopefully the compliance strategy is not wait for the FTC to knock on your door. The compliance strategy should be that it's some combination of activity that's governed by an organizational component like a privacy office, involves compliance officers that are monitoring certain things, involves security people, involved with building things the right way, and of course involves the audits process where you let your internal audits department go crazy now and then and find out if you're doing everything you said you were going to do. Comments on that? Okay. Okay, so I mentioned the working groups where you start, and these are the people that are going to be involved in the analysis I just described of those 4 key areas. General counsel, government affairs, I mentioned. Product and operational leads, this is probably the most important area. The people who own the products usually own the customer records. They're the ones that are going to care about all this because they're the ones that potentially will have the use of this data constrained in some way by a different privacy policy. I didn't have marketing on here, but marketing is a key player in this as well because it's usually marketing that will wind up signing all kinds of fun agreements with people to exchange data, and then they go and check with everybody, is that okay after the data's already been exchanged. Information security, of course, we have a big responsibility in building the control environment around all this. IT is going to have to figure out the costs associated with this. If you think about it this way, in Y2K, we had to change a couple of numbers in a date field, or expand a date field to 4 digits instead of 2. Imagine the cost associated with re-architecting your principal back office applications. I mean, it's big. I won't tell you what our number is, but it's in the double-digit millions, okay? And if you want to do it the right way. So IT is going to have to take this information, take the control environment that you helped them develop, and take it back and figure out the cost. And then they're going to have to come up with the money. I don't know about your IT organization, but let's say you showed up and said, "Oh, I need $20 million to re-architect the data for data privacy." That would be a big shock for somebody's budget, and probably some vice president somewhere would not get paid his bonus at the end of the year, if that was a big surprise. Human resources needs to be involved because you've got an internal privacy issue as well. Think about it this way. You're in the business, let's say, of selling financial services or insurance. You've got employees who are customers. How do you deal with that? I mean, that's a complicated environment.
Also, human resources owns most of the information. Ultimately, they see themselves as the owners of it. And I think it also with this slide, it's important to note that your company may be very different in its organization than to have a government affairs office or to have compliance and internal audits. You may be a much smaller company or not an insurance company, but the working group members absolutely need to be the people who are going to buy in ultimately and bring this forth. And that's why sales and marketing is absolutely critical to have on this working group, because they're the ones that are going to go around it.
Right.
They're the first people that are going to go right around whatever you say. So you make sure that you get them to agree to this, or they're not going to comply, and you're going to be out of it.
One translation you may want to make on this is just equate these things to roles in the working group.
Yeah.
And for example, you will need input from somebody on public policy. If you don't have a government affairs office, you need to find out. Maybe it's through your general counsel if you have an in-house counsel. Maybe they monitor the regulatory environment. Maybe there's some group. But you need to have somebody who does tell you what the heck's going on in the public policy space.
Or hire a lawyer. There are lawyers out there that specialize in privacy policy now, and they work in technical lawyers that work with companies, and they'll come in and be your government affairs office.
Okay, so now you've got your policy, you've got your working group, you know the task at hand. It's again going out and doing the stuff that I mentioned earlier against these 4 areas. And keep in mind, this is one approach. I mean, you can define the areas, these risk areas, in any way you want, just so you get a grip on it. This has been my approach on things. I always want to know what's the governance model for the organization, who's accountable and responsible, who has which role and responsibility. So that's why I have organization up there. You use different terminology a little bit than I do, but
yeah, you'll see if you have the handouts from my slides. I do a sort of more of a step-step framework kind of thing, because that's what I've found was successful. But again, Eddie and I are coming at this from different. He's the internal security officer, and I've always been the external consultant, helping folks work through and plan. So you will see those framework slides in the handouts.
So where if you're a security officer, where might you be involved in, let's say, these 4 areas? Well, I mean, I can tell you that I'm involved in all 4, right? Because if you think about it from an organizational perspective, I have a role with respect to information policy and protection of information, and this is certainly an issue of protection of information. So whatever we do for a privacy policy perspective needs to be tracked and synced into information security or information assurance policy that's out there. From an organizational perspective, I clearly have some role with respect to this. From a technology perspective, we're talking technical countermeasures, access controls, encryption, networking interfaces, all kinds of things like that. Again, I have a role in terms of helping to build a system that is secure and supports our policy. And finally, from a compliance perspective, I need to provide support to those elements that are monitoring compliance, because they may need technical assistance in determining if a solution is appropriate or not. I mean, that's just one example. But in any case, everyone will go off and do what they have to do. In terms of what you all have to do against this sample framework that I've given you here, you need to go off and figure out, where do I stand on each of these things? What do I bring to the table? What's my role? And then how do I start working that to success in some manner?
And I think, do we have the architecture slides still on here?
We do. It's
okay.
It's a little further on, I think.
I'm going to address the gaps in there.
This is your out, by the way, and this is important to me because I needed an out on this, and that is the company needs a privacy officer. Now, again, some companies may not be large enough to support a full-time billet, and I guarantee you it's going to be hard for you to find people with this experience today. But as
Dr. Lee Kushner.
Right, as a collateral duty, it's something that's required, and I think HIPAA actually does require someone to be designated.
Yes,
as a
HIPAA does
privacy
require
officer.
a designated privacy officer.
Right. I mean, so, put someone in charge and hold them accountable for this. And, if you want to be that person and this interests you, let me know and I'll tell you offline about my experience with it, which was good.
Do you know what's interesting? I'm not clear if this person has to be full-time dedicated or if they wear multiple hats. So I think that's going to be a way that a lot of people get around this, is that they're just going to plop the privacy officer hat on somebody who's, also, I don't know.
We took a fellow who was director
Vacuuming the rugs.
of legislative policy, made him the privacy officer. It's probably 80% of what he does at Nationwide, and he has a staff. Use a common reporting tool. One of the things as you go through this process of, going from where you are today to where you want to be, I mean, again, it's sort of like tracking any project. You want to know, are we green, yellow, or red? And as you go through, for example, the 4 areas I mentioned, okay, how are we doing on process? How are we doing on figuring out the organizational components? Assuming we have technology deliverables associated with this, do we have a system that comes together in the working group and we could say, oh, we're yellow, red, or whatever? It's just an example, but find some way of managing this project as you would any other. Manage very closely high-risk areas. For example, where there's a stated deadline. GLB now has a stated deadline of July something of next year. And, you need to work towards that deadline, and there's certain things that have to occur in certain time frames. Those are high-risk areas, and those need to be monitored closely. Or, for example, you encounter a system that has nagging security problems that you've been aware of all along. Now you lump privacy on top of that environment. That, to me, would be flagged as a high-risk area. We haven't been able to get this under control. For example, transmission of data to third parties. We haven't been able to get that under control. Now we have to get it under control. All right, we got to really pay close attention to that as we move forward. Report to a central repository. I already mentioned a lot of similarities.
Right, and I mean, I think basically you could summarize that slide with, just because privacy is new and we haven't dealt with it before doesn't mean you can throw away the standards of good project management, because this is a project, and keep those milestones and keep following standard project process.
Okay, I think I've talked about most of this already. My phase 3 is actually just do all this stuff. But keep in mind there's a cost associated with it. And, you want to discover those costs early on and get those up to management and get people to respond to them. I don't know how many of you have had problems getting adequate funding for your program, but it seems to me that every time I ask for more money, and even if I get it, I realize I really needed another $1 million or $2 million more, than what I asked for. This is a very good way to obtain some fundings and to implement some process that maybe you didn't think you could implement before. Regulation has a way of doing that. People ask, well, like, why is DOD disciplined in a lot of ways? Why are banks disciplined? Regulation. I mean, any highly regulated environment is going to have a lot more money put on some of this stuff.
Right, yeah, I mean, it's because oftentimes security is the big sinkhole. You're not adding to the profit line. Why are you taking money away from the company? And this is a lot of administrators have found that, well, now the CEO is going, well, we don't want to be out of the regulation. We don't want to be out of compliance. Here's how much do you need? So it's been a nice turnaround.
I'll let you address this one and the next one.
Okay. So yeah, as you start to build the blocks, we went through the assessment. First, you need the policy. You built the policy, that's great. The policy is usually a philosophy. It's usually sort of a theory. It's what we want to go for. But it's not the procedure. It's not where the rubber hits the road. And you also have to actually put in a procedure, and that's real rules. Eddie had talked about scripting, and scripting is a good example of a procedure, how somebody answers the phone and what data they can give out about a customer. They need to have a script or at least a set of rules so that they know what's right or wrong. You can say, yes, we want to have strong authentication, but unless you say strong authentication is two-factor, using a secure ID card, and every person has to hold that secure ID card in a safe place. If you don't have that kind of written procedure, people can basically blow away all the nice work of your policy. At one company I worked with, a very large company, we did have strong authentication at the perimeter with the secure ID card. And we traveled all the time, and the consultants really didn't like to have to worry about the secure ID card and the laptop, and I can't get into the local network if I don't have both of them. So what a bunch of people started doing was they had super glued their secure ID card right to the top of their laptop, which is great. They were never without it, never lost it. They always had it together. Of course, we've now reduced it down to single-factor authentication when they were going into the perimeter. That's the kind of thing that policies protect you from. Policies tell you what and how is okay. Procedures protect you from in the policy. Really, without them, your policy it's not going to be very useful.
Think also of, again, I compared it in a break to the EDI model. Presumably you have some kind of network security perimeter policy, right, that describes if you're trading data with an untrusted party, untrusted being, not you, basically. So if you're trading data with somebody like, let's say, a third-party affiliate in some way that you are authorized to exchange customer data with them, what process do you use to do that? Do you use some kind of PGP armored file that has the customer data in it, and you exchange keys with the other side? Do you require SSH or something? I mean, how do you do this? This is also part of the whole procedural element of this.
Yeah, it's really, it's simple. You say that it has to be transported securely, okay, but to say it has to be encrypted with this size key, that's the procedure that you get in there.
I'll do that one.
Okay.
Okay, so part of what we talked about in the first session was the fact that there are actually regulations that are forcing us to do this stuff. Again, it depends on the industry you're in, but you'd be amazed at how some of the applicability works and pervades different areas. Graham-Leach-Bliley, 501B, the recent FTC, which means any website. FTC, well, not only websites, I mean any business, but websites are what they're after lately. They've released some draft standards and some draft rules on this, and actually describe some things you're supposed to be doing. There's some draft rule under HIPAA that's been released, not really security specific, but at least privacy specific.
There are some security drafts, yes.
Okay.
Yes, they can't. The final security can't come until the final privacy is approved.
Okay. And then you've got the European Union stuff that's been out there for, I guess, almost over 2 years now. So you need to do all this stuff if you want to comply with regulations. The statutes are somewhat vague and they're not complete. So, bottom line, though, as I read all this stuff, is you got to have a real security program in place. Not just lip service to security. And you need to have a demonstrable standard of due care. That may sound like some vague, newspeak or something to you, but I think one of the roles that you all have in this is what is a demonstrable standard of due care? Different companies will interpret it different ways, but again, you got to look at this as a bonus. The bonus is that you get to help define what is that demonstrable standard of due care, just like we have generally accepted security practices and principles, whatever that is, and we have different publications that I'm sure you've all seen out there that sort of govern the way we're supposed to be doing things in the security space, but are not, really necessarily formal standards in any way. Well, maybe the British standards, if you like those, but I mean, but the point is that you get to define what's reasonable within a boundary, and I think that this is an opportunity. That's how I looked at it. I just said this is an opportunity for me to tighten the screws a little more and to get done what I needed to get done. And assuming that you are viewed as the experts that you are in your organization, it's reasonable to say, here's my analysis of how we get to this standard of due care, and here are the policies, procedures, the people changes, and mechanisms that we need to put around all this to make it workable in some way. So this adds fuel to the fire, definitely.
Yeah.
Your turn.
Okay. Before I get into tools, I don't think architecture is in there.
It's there somewhere.
Next one.
Okay. It should go before.
Okay, we can do that one now.
Thank you. I'll say 5 more times. How's that? Practices are the link between the procedures. They're actually left out of this, but an important thing about practices and procedures, you could apply it to the same thing, is that not only is it where the rubber hits the road, but that you've got to go through a form of, is this viable? Is this something people are going to be able to do? Because most of the time people find that a policy or a procedure sounds really good in theory, but it's not going to work in practice. So you have to test that. That also applies to your architecture and technology. A lot of times a privacy plan sounds really good in theory. We will have end-to-end authentication from the user to where the back-end data resides. It will be a secure SSL tunnel. Nothing will break it. That may sound really good. It may be a really good dream, but there could be that your architecture is not going to support that. It could be that where the data sits on your mainframe isn't going to support some of the technical concepts that you've got in your policy. So get realistic and get real about what your environment is. You don't live in a green field. You live in an architecture that is there and exists, and you probably have some spaghetti back there, and it's not very pretty, and you got multiple systems, and some of them are old and creaky, and some of them somebody doesn't even remember how to administer. So as you're trying to build this, build it to something that you can truly implement in your architecture, and if you can't in that architecture, you're going to have to go back and rethink. Do we rip it out? Can we afford to rip it out? Is that viable? Or do we have to change the policy? How can we be in compliance, or how can we support privacy with the current architecture and technology?
How many people use middleware in their environments?
Yeah.
Raise your hand.
Whoa.
How many people know exactly every piece of middleware and what it does and has analyzed the security context of all that middleware?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Look at him. And he's looking punch drunk from it.
Yeah. No, you see what I'm saying? I mean, just that alone, is impossible when you talk about end-to-end security. I mean,
right. And the other thing is, as with privacy and security, we can't be bolting it on anymore. We've got to incorporate this. And as you're building an architecture around, build this right in. Think about it immediately. Don't wait until the end and just go, plop, because it's not going to work. Okay, thank you. Now back to the tools in the toolbox. Sorry, I give this talk separately, and I was all out of whack there with the other slide.
I messed up her slides.
I'm sorry. Tools in the toolbox. Basically, as we said before, there's no silver bullet for security. There's not one, this is going to solve everything. You just take it out and it's your security solution. There are tools in your toolbox. They're the tools that you're used to, and when you really get down to actually implementing, going from your policy, your procedures, your practice, fitting it into your architecture, you're going to find that the final things that support your privacy solution are things that you're pretty familiar with already. Perimeter security is going to be a big part of it. So your old firewalls and intrusion detection. Identification, IAA, a big favorite of security people, that is absolutely critical. Authorization is key, and authentication are key to keeping privacy and the data separate. So looking at the standard support for that. Directory services are going to play a big part, and role-based access on your databases. PKI and encryption, of course. A lot of old security people actually call encryption privacy, although that's gotten very politicized and people are angry about it now. But using digital IDs, the digital signatures to support who's used what, who's seen what data, timestamp the data, that's going to be key as you're going on to support some of the compliance issues as well, and VPNs to keep the data secure. Access auditing is going to be critical. How are we going to prove that you're in compliance? We're going to have to audit, and we're going to have to take a look at the logs. If you have to say, I've given this person notice, you can either mail them something or you can put it on the website. Companies are looking to put it on the website, but now you have to have a way on that website to say, hey, this person actually saw it. You're going to have a log that they saw it. Checking the data integrity, not just did it get here from there, fine, but also, is this the real data? And ultimately, the good old opt-in, opt-out. They got to do it no matter which way we go.
There's some stuff on the landscape that some people are touting as magic pills and whatnot. I mean, one of them is P3P, Platform for Privacy Preferences. It's a W3W standard. Well, I don't know if it's a standard yet. I guess it's a draft.
Standardizing,
yeah, yes. Thank you. The idea is that there are a set of attributes that a website can advertise, as to their privacy practices and policy, use of information, etc. You have a browser that's P3P enabled. You can set your preferences, and basically it's like dating. You get together and you see if you're compatible. If you're not, you go your separate ways. If you are, you stay together. The problem is that sometimes it's like strange dating where you really don't want to be with this person anymore, but you don't know how to say no because you're not exactly speaking the right language. P3P has gotten to the point where it's so cumbersome that in some respects it's going to be hard to match up data sets between user preferences and between what the websites can actually advertise in some way. So in my opinion, the jury's still out as to whether or not that technology is going to help consumers, or whether it's really going to go anywhere or not.
It's also been attacked lately by privacy advocates who say that it's a breach of privacy because when you go to a site, your P3P client releases what your privacy standards are. So some privacy advocates are saying, well, see, it's revealing what your privacy standards are and what's acceptable. So, yeah, P3P, it's as with a lot of standards, it's been running around in the industry a few years, and it may or may not ever come out in full deployment.
Customer lifecycle management. Hello? Hello? Check, check. Battery. Okay. Customer lifecycle management. I mean, this is the issue of CRMs, yeah?
I'm fascinated by the things you said about that. A lot of the specifications in
Right.
Right.
and
Oh, is this on?
downside that you reported about the standard and elimination in the recent working drafts. So I was wondering if you actually think that if this technology got deployed, say, in the next year to a year and a half, whether companies could adopt it, whether they have the infrastructure understanding, publish a privacy policy, and actually get this out quickly soon.
I'm not convinced that there's synchronicity between the consumer and privacy advocate groups on where P3P is and where, let's say, both software vendors and website operators are in terms of the way the technology should be used and the way the attributes should be used within the data framework.
Also, I think you also have to ask the bottom line is, most companies just care about making money, right? So will you not do business with me if I'm not supporting P3P? And if the consumers out there say, yeah, hey, I'm going to do business with you, I don't care. I mean, remember when PKI was coming out and banks said, no one will bank online unless they have digital certificates? Well, that went out the window, right? So if people will do business with you and you don't have and you're not P3P compliant, then there's not going to be a big business driver for companies to put in P3P.
So what happened in all browser settings, for instance, like force doing P3P that was more restrictive if the site didn't publish a P3P policy?
I'm not understanding your question exactly.
So if the website didn't publish a P3P policy,
Yes.
the consumer agreed with, what would happen to the website if they didn't get some of the private data that they currently get about a consumer? Like, what if they couldn't get cookies without?
Well, you're saying what will happen to websites if they're not allowed to gather and place information from the browser? Well, you do find a lot when people turn off their cookies, you'll often find that the website says, you know what, I will not function correctly. And that is a good, like sometimes you'll go to a website and they say, sorry, if you don't have Flash, our website will not function correctly. So.
What do you think would happen to the websites if that became the default policy in the browser?
I think this is I think it's a pretty big philosophical question. I think that the bottom line really is going to be if the consumer demands it. We're going to find some more.
My
but the
mother
jury is
doesn't
out now.
care about P3P, and she's on eBay all the. She's got 3 computers. I mean, she's a retired Federal Reserve Bank examiner. Okay, she's got 3 computers. She's got eBay up on one of them all the time, and some GeoCities something or another on another one. And I don't know what she does on the third one. Probably hack or something, And I mean, she doesn't care about any of this, and she's not worried about who's collecting.
She's running an offshore gambling site, actually.
She may be laundering money since she knows how to do that. I have no idea, but the point is that I think there are a lot of consumer. Well, but if you call her, if you're New York Times and you call her at like 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, she'll use every 4-letter word in the book, telling you where all these things and take me off your list. So, I don't know where this is going to go. I mean, will websites go out of business if they don't do this? For example.
Yeah, I
Is
doubt
someone
it.
going to legislate this into existence? I don't know. What's your thought on that?
What's my thought?
Yeah.
I think that there's a strong possibility that the browser might have a degraded experience
that's the world. I mean, that's the world
it'd be
corporate
interesting
America
to
wants to live in. I mean, because that's a self-regulated world potentially. Consumers have likes and dislikes, right? People respond to it. You know.
We have 5 minutes.
Oh. Okay. Let me move on. Sorry.
Yeah, we're happy to. We have 5 minutes, and we know that there's probably going to be a big flood of people when the 5:30 reception opens. So we're going to try and hurry this up, and we're very happy to talk and answer questions afterwards.
Even if we don't know what we're talking about in some cases like that, you know. Customer lifecycle management, that's the whole CRM debate. Do you have a single view of a customer through a customer file in some way, customer information file? If so, it's a lot easier to manage the customer relationship, but data warehouses are expensive and difficult to implement, so where do you go with that? You've got anonymizing technologies, Anonymous, for example.
Great. Also, Zero Knowledge,
Zero
the Canadian
Knowledge.
company, is a strong player in that area.
And of course, you've got all these one-off solutions. Like I use CookiePal, and I basically don't accept any cookies from everyone. I went to buy something on babystyle.com the other day, and it wouldn't do business with me because I would not accept any cookies from it. So go figure. Okay, let's get to the rest of this. Good do care practices. You've got to get serious about data classification if you're not. You got to mark things as private. What that means is going to be very complicated. We don't have time for today. There's going to be database elements. There's going to be desktop document type of elements in that. If you're not doing it, you need to start doing it. You should build data privacy into any security certification methodologies you use. Where I work, for example, new environments or major modifications to old environments have to go through a security certification and accreditation process. That process has certain milestones associated with it. Data privacy, we're now retrofitting into that process as a checkpoint. Those of you that are involved in QA processes, for example, like the SSE-CMM, System Security Engineering Capabilities Maturity Model, as you may know, there are substantial work on process areas associated with security. We're actually building a reference model for a process area associated with a data privacy element of the SSE-CMM. If anyone wants to talk about that, let me know. Of course,
Yeah,
conducting audits.
You do need a test plan.
Right.
You really do.
Typical general controls, I don't need to bore you with that, you know what it's like, but an important element is if you have people already signing for their passwords, make sure there's a confidentiality statement in there. You know, you can do that. If they don't sign for passwords and don't sign confidentiality statements, jump up and down and make it happen. You might need to modify your warning banners on systems. Here's another interesting element. Consider the use of third-party assurance. Trustee, for example, has a seal that will, not attest, but will at least do a desktop audit of your privacy practices. And a lot of consumers think that's a good thing. There are other models out there like PwC's Better Web, Better Business Bureau Online, or Better BBB Online, is that what it's called?
Yeah, BBB Online.
CPA Web Trust, et cetera. All these are assurance seals that may be useful to you in some way with respect to how consumers view your...
Yeah, and know your market, because some consumers could care less and some consumers really want that attestation. Also, in terms of third-party attestation, third-party audits, too.
Right.
Get somebody to come in. And you should have a test plan in QA, but you also need to have a third-party audit to attest that you are in compliance as well.
Mm-hmm. Or even before you do your compliance.
Right. It's going to be interesting to come under SAS 70 auditing, too, in the future.
Absolutely. We've talked about that. How many of you conduct SAS 70 audits today in your organization? Okay, I've had a lot of talk with some of the big five people about redesigning the SAS 70 audit to be more specific towards information security risks and also address privacy assurance within the scope of SAS 70, the outcome of which being one of these third-party assurance privacy seals.
And the Big Five have established, you do need this kind of attestation. The Big Five have established privacy auditing practices. They had to do something with all their Y2K people, and they're all working in privacy audit right now.
And the good thing about the Big Five firm attestation services is that in a business-to-business type of environment, that's really meaningful. I mean, if you think about it, you know, companies will look at each other's financial statements, you know, but within a due diligence process, it doesn't go as deep as long as the attestation associated with those financial statements is sound in some way. If you had CPAs suddenly signing on the dotted line as part of a SAS 70 that said all these privacy practices are followed. That's a pretty good statement. In a B2B environment, that might be something you can count on if it's scoped right down the road. You're going to see the emergence of privacy brokers. Basically, these are electronic intermediaries that guarantee the anonymity of transactions. You will definitely see that on electronic marketplaces. I'm actually working with a couple of companies that are involved in developing this market space in terms of the privacy of transactions, the scrubbing of transactions, still getting the B2B stuff to flow the way it needs to, but taking out things that may be violations of either corporate or personal privacy in some way. And finally, you'll probably see the emergence of ISO type of standards for certification of data privacy standards. I've heard a lot of talk about that. Want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, and I'll try and be real brief. But honestly, this is a very important slide. Test and train. Make sure that the people that you're working with understand and are educated about privacy. Privacy, just as in security breaches, most of them happen with people. It's going to be the same with privacy. So you got to make sure that people understand what the. Most people don't break policies or practices because they want to. They want to be bad. They don't super glue secure ID cards to the top of their laptop because they're trying to be rebels in your organization. They're trying to get their job done and do it in a quick and reliable manner. So if they don't understand the consequences of what they're doing, they're going to do it because they think it's making their job easier. So definitely bring them in on it. Make sure that you've delivered the training. Get in writing that people understand what they're supposed to do so that you do have recourse within your organization if somebody doesn't actually do it. And, watch and learn. If you do see people... If you have a ridiculous password aging rule, you'll start seeing stickies on monitors with passwords on them. Or you'll start finding out that passwords are really useful things like mommy 1, mommy 2, mommy 3. You can't put in things that practices that people can't follow. So watch and learn as people are starting to execute those policies and those practices. See what works and what doesn't within the organization. And if you have to hone it and tighten it, if things aren't working, fix them. It's iterative. This is not going to be a fix once it's done. This will be an iterative process. So lots to look forward to.
Last but not least, some closing comments on this. Again, you got to define roles and responsibilities up front. You'll find that a lot of people you work with, people that you have the same issues with every day on security, will want to opt out of this whole issue. They don't want to hear it, I can tell you that, and they certainly don't want to hear about the cost associated with this. So you need to be really pushy in terms of helping to define roles and responsibility, both in your organization and in organizations with which you associate. Don't underestimate the work involved, especially when you're dealing with the IT folks. It's not a small thing if you want to make this work for real and you want to actually comply with policy. There's a lot of time and cost involved with it. Use formal approaches. Bruce talked about it today in his keynote. I mean, process is really important to this stuff. It's all about risk management and building process around that. Security certification processes, data classification processes, having technology standards in place that are somehow enforced. This will make you successful. If all these words are meaningless to you and you're in a chaotic world with respect to security, doing privacy will be very, very difficult for you. This is an opportunity, as I mentioned to you, it's an opportunity to get management a little more interested in security. Maybe they don't want to hear about your firewalls and your IDSs and your secure ID cards and all this, but privacy is an issue that we all understand. It's common sense. Do you like these invasions in your privacy? No. How do we as a company feel about this? How do our customers feel? That's a good starting point. Take that then down to how do you do something with your job with respect to this. Obviously, budgeting is going to be a key thing. Some of you may be involved in budgeting for 2001. Better think about this. If you're in a large organization, I tell you, I have 2 people working for me right now. All they do is privacy. Okay? And finally, as Diana said, training is really key across the board. We put some books in here which suggest the latest one that I've read, which is really useful, is The 100th Window. I think, yeah, it's on there. It's written by the founders of Trustee. It's a really good book. And we put a bunch of websites. They're on this set of slides and the set of slides in Diana's original presentation. So thanks a lot for your time. If we have any questions. jump in anytime. In fact, why don't you just come up if you have any questions?
Yeah,
since we're out of
seriously,
time,
send everybody else.
and we'll let you all go.
Thank
Thanks
you
a
so
lot.
much. Thanks.